Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. So this time is reserved for me to give the rector's report, and for the first couple of years that's what I did. I read from this long report and your eyes glazed over, and so last year I gave a sermon, and that worked out okay. So this year I thought I'd do a little of both. And so to begin my rector's report, I have a question. My question is this: how are we doing?
Great.
Speak out. Speak more. How are we doing? Great. Sense of community. We're growing. There's a few more people here this year than last. That's good. Great. Mission programs. Out in the world doing stuff, helping folk, feeding people, driving vans around, trying not to back into stuff.
We're looking forward.
Say that? Looking forward, not stuck in place. We're praying weird prayers and no one's complaining too much.
We reach out in compassion and love.
Compassion and love for others. Jim? We like one another. That's important. It's very important in these days and times. Anything else?
We're non-judgmental.
As best we can be. As best we can do. We're a work in progress, but we strive to not be judgmental. It can be a safe place to be, we hope. That is an aspiration for us. All that is true. I would add a few things. We do intergenerational work well. If you're 3 or you're 93, we want you here. We want to take care of you. We want to look after you. I think at the early service, when the average age is a little higher than at this service, they say you take care of the older people. But we love that you welcome the younger people. And so that's important. That's a gift that we have. And I think it's one of those things that you don't always see in contemporary Christianity is a commitment to intergenerational care and worship together, and I think that's important. I think another thing we strive to do here, which sometimes, especially in times like these, where we've just had an inauguration, we've had a change of presidents, is we work really hard, despite our differences, to come together and worship. So we have people of all types and thoughts about how the world should work and how leaders should act and all of those things. And so we work really hard to stay together in the middle of all that. And sometimes it's easier than other times, and sometimes it's easier for you and harder for me, and other times it's harder for you and easier for me, and that's just the way it has to work. But I think that commitment to stay together in the midst of differences is a gift, and it's something that we can model in the community, because it's not that way in many other places. You're either committed to one or you're committed to the other, and then somehow politics has become our religion. And hopefully here, our religion informs, our faith informs our politics. That would be my hope. We strive to care for all those who appear here. We try not to be judgmental. We try to learn when we are, and maybe our minds can be changed. So that's a place that we stand. We stand in the middle, and we try to say, you're welcome, and get to know you and your story, and go from there. So I think we have a great gift here. And so now I'm going to shift a little bit, and now I'm going to preach, although that might have sounded a little preachy there. But I do want to acknowledge it was a week, right? We had inauguration, and then the Episcopal Church gets in the news because Bishop Buddy decided that she needed to use her time to talk to the president directly, and some people were really offended by that, and others thought she was really brave. And I'm just going to let you decide what you think about that. It's not my job to defend a bishop, or at least not one that's not my own bishop. And so I commend to, read her sermon, make your own thoughts about that. However, when I got the lectionary texts for today and read them and thought about it for a minute, I thought, what a layup the lectionary committee has given me, especially our annual meeting and the reading from Corinthians, but also the reading from Luke's Gospel, because I think they're really useful in this time, because it wouldn't have mattered if Vice President Harris had won the election or President Trump had won the election. This text, I think, is really informative and helpful in difficult times, in times of change, in times where people aren't quite sure how they think or feel, or maybe they're very sure about how they think or feel. But Jesus, in Luke's Gospel, we're told he walks into the synagogue, right? And he's just been baptized. He now is out, and people are learning about him and want to know what he is thinking. So he goes into the synagogue, and then he unrolls these scrolls, these beautiful handwritten, I assume they're beautiful, these handwritten scrolls. Very rare, right? There were, in order to have written things, you had to have people that just sat there and wrote, because there weren't printing presses, so they had these scrolls, and Jesus unrolls the scroll from Isaiah. And then he says this. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he rolled up the scroll and he sat down. And the next week we'll find out what happened. So I'm going to save that. I'll give you a little hint. Not everybody was happy. Not everybody was happy. And so I think that's one of the things that we can learn this morning is sometimes the text is good news. It's very good news. And for some, though, it may not be such good news, or at least it may not be good news at first. So if you heard Jesus and you were poor, or you were a captive, or you could not see, if you were oppressed, then this might have been really good news to you. But if you were sitting in a position of authority, or if you were holding on to power, or if there was some other reason why this wasn't good news, if you were an oppressor, then all of a sudden, what is this guy saying? Is this good news for me? And so as we move through the next year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 7, I just want to remind you that our jobs as preachers and as teachers is not always to make you feel good. I hope you feel good more often than not, but sometimes the gospel is a sucker punch, and it hurts, and it causes you to stop. And it makes you think differently than maybe you thought before, and it makes you wrestle, and you have to go, is my brain right? What is going on? So I think back, and I'm reminded, prior to seminary, way back, whenever that was, I attended a church, and one Sunday morning, one of my friends shows up at church, and he's agitated, really agitated. And after the service is over, we, like Episcopalians do, we go to the coffee hour. At this particular church, we had a really nice deck outside, and so I would kind of get out on the deck because, I was pretty introverted then, and as I can be now. And my friend comes outside, and there's a few others of us there together, and so he starts to tell us his story, why he's so agitated. And what he tells us is that he has brought a gun. It's in his car, and when he leaves there, he's going to go home, he's going to cross the pasture, and he's going to shoot his neighbor because something terrible has happened. Something terrible has happened. And it was terrible. And I might have wanted to have shot my neighbor too. but we sat with him, and we prayed with him, and we talked with him, and he calmed down a little bit. And then the rector comes out, Father Roy. Some of you met Father Roy a few years ago. And Father Roy looks at him and he says, sometimes the gospel makes us do things that we wouldn't otherwise like to do. Sometimes the gospel hits us in the gut. And so what would Jesus have you to do? So the man went out to his car, and he picked up the gun, and he brought it in, and he handed it to the rector. And they said a little prayer, and the man went home, and as far as I know, never crossed the field and went over and shot his neighbor. In fact, the last I saw him, he was on Facebook riding his motorcycle in the breeze. So in that moment, he got the punch. He knew the text, he knew the gospel, he knew what Jesus would ask him to do, who Jesus was calling him to be, and he overcame that moment of desperation, that moment of anger, that moment of whatever was going on in his head. Maybe he showed up at church this morning so we would talk him out of it. I don't know. All I know is that Roy said to him really seemed to make a huge difference. And so that's what the gospel can be for us. So it can be good news. It can make us feel good. It can give us hope. It can make us want to do the right thing. But other times it can punch us in the gut. And it can make us think differently. It can make us question our motives. It can help us to recognize that maybe we need to turn in a different direction, that maybe we need to do something different than we thought we ought to do. And the only way we can do that is to stand up here on Sundays and proclaim it, and then go back out into the world and try to live it as best we can. And sometimes we do that well, and other times not so much, which is also good news. You don't have to get it right. There's not a test. Some days we're going to be better at it than others. Some days it's going to be really, really hard. And we will get it wrong, but thankfully we have a God who created us, a God who loves us, and a God who wants to be in relationship with us and loves us despite all this. And He lives with us here, as Bruce talked about in the Treasurer's Report, moves in and through and with us, and allows us to care for one another, to love each other, to take that care and love out into the world and do the work we're called to do. And the work we're called to do, as is described in Corinthians, is different. It'll look different for me than it looks for you. And that's okay. It's not better or worse. It is what it is. Together, we do this work. And so, in conclusion, I would say that I'm very thankful to be able to serve in this place with these wonderful people. We have a great clergy staff. We have a wonderful lay staff. We have great leadership amongst you, and it's a great place to be. And I thank you for your faithfulness, your commitment to St. Matt's, to Grand Junction, to the poor, to the oppressed, to those in need. You do wonderful work. Terry at the early service said we punch above our weight class. And I don't know if that's a good metaphor or not, but I think it's helpful in this case. Continue to do the work you do. Continue to care for one another. Continue to meet for coffee and argue about politics and the things that concern you. But don't forget whose you are and why you do what you do. And for this, we give thanks to God. Amen.